Hello, I want to talk about some little experiments I'm doing with ChatGPT and a few other chatbots recently, all having to do with creating stories that illustrate or convey mathematical proofs. And there's quite a lot, and I won't be talking about very many of them, but I'm going to start with talking about this one. And I think what I'll start doing is talking about the resulting story and the illustrations that were created by it. And here, I've got this ready here. Um, okay, so I'll start giving you a sense of the story and then how it was created, and then we'll move on from there. Um, okay, so the story is about this cave girl that lives in prehistoric times. The idea that there were dinosaurs isn't my idea. And um, actually, let me. Um,
One day, while the tribe was away hunting, Ada discovered a new pastime. She found an abundant collection of pebbles by the river and started making rectangles with them, one row of pebbles on top of another. She noticed that some quantities of pebbles made a perfect rectangle while others did not. The numbers that could form a perfect rectangle, like 4, 6, 8, 9, were easy to find, while other numbers like 2, 3, 5, 7 couldn't. Odd indeed, Ada thought, for these peculiar numbers refused to create neat rectangles no matter how hard she tried. Ada decided to call these rock lines. One day, while Ada
Maybe that's enough. So the story, she meets this wise old man, and he, you know, asks her some questions, and she's kind of, and he connects it up with the notion of prime numbers and composite numbers and so on. But now she wants to see if she could find all of the prime numbers. And he claims that there's just an endless number, but she has to figure out why. And so she starts with two prime numbers, 2 and 3, and then she copies the 2 3 times to get a 2 by 3 one, and then adds another uh, one to get 7. And 7, she can't figure out how to make a rectangle. And then she copies that to get 70 times 3 plus 1, and so on. So then she kind of realizes this fundamental thing about prime numbers is that um, either the product of these primes plus 1 itself is prime, or it could be divided by a prime that wasn't in that list, that wasn't discovered. So she could always get new primes, and she gets all happy that she's figured out this problem and so on. And I'll talk about this app in a minute, but let's first go back to the how this was created. So if we follow this link, so here's the conversation I had with ChatGPT. It was really about a week earlier than that. So I started off here just saying, create a story that proves there's an infinite number of primes and at the same time is a captivating story. Use the metaphor of laying out the number of pebbles in a rectangle for composite numbers only. Tell the story for a child who's fascinated by the prehistoric humans. So almost all the other examples, I don't actually hand ChatGPT a metaphor, but in all the other examples, it never comes up with this one of laying things out as a rectangle. So I gave it that help. So it comes up with a story pretty close to the one that I just read or showed you. And then I ask, is everything in the story mathematically correct? And it says, this part's, um, you know, correct. This part's correct, and this. Um, but then I say, how is this third thing consistent with in the story where it says this And it says, "Oh, I see the confusion. I didn't clearly address the metaphor properly, and here's a better version." Um, but then it got mixed up about this terminology, rectangles and so on. Um, so how I was arranging it, like multiplication, and yeah. So the problem was that it, it wasn't really coming up with a metaphor for multiplication very well at this point. So it does improve things, but see, it's really talking easily misunderstood as adding instead of multiplying, and I point that out, and it comes back with a much better story. Um, but it's not perfect, so I kind of give it a little prod by saying, the way in which you can multiply the primes and add one would be you take one of the primes, duplicate it so that the number of copies is the same as the next prime. Then you got that rectangle, then you turn it into another line, and then you do the same thing with the next prime, and then you finally add one, and it likes my idea, and it rewrites it with that idea. Then I just say, okay, put it all together into a full story, because I was just rewriting part of it. And also it was sometimes calling them rectangles, sometimes rock rectangles. It came up with these names, but it wasn't being consistent. So here's the next draft. So then I was thinking of illustrating it. So I said, suggest prompts for a text to image generator for each paragraph. Remember, this is for a young child. And it comes up with these prompts. And then I ask, what's a good title for the story? What will be a good prompt for the cover of the story? But then the problem with the prompts is, as you'll see, they kind of, the DALL-E or Stable Diffusion doesn't know who Ada is and what's going on. So I tried to say, redo the illustrations, taking into account doesn't have any context, and for each paragraph, if you're going to refer to Kano or Ada, you got to say who they are and so on. Didn't care that I misspelled things, mistyped them. So I came up with a better set of prompts that I ended up using. I didn't like number 5 because these things don't work very well with a whole bunch of people. We didn't really need a bunch of people. So it rewrites that. And then it had come up with rectangle, but then it had lone rock for primes that were just a line. So I thought, why not rock line instead of lone rock? And so it, did that. And then there was, I was worried that there was the way division was talked about might not be understood by a young child or something, and came up with a more intuitive way, again, about rearranging pebbles and stuff and rectangles. So it rewrites with that suggestion. And then I was worried that this wasn't right, and then I did a copy and paste mistake because it was supposed to be, well, it doesn't matter. And so it rewrote that section. But then it didn't keep that idea about multiplication of the primes by duplicating a line a prime number of times, a different prime number of times. So it got the idea, and it fixed the story accordingly. And then I found a couple of the parts kind of confusing, and pointed out that there are multiple ways of arranging things and so on. So and it said, "Oh yeah, you're right. That can be confusing," and rewrote the story again. I wasn't so sure about this, so I pointed out this problem here, and it wrote it with a little bit more clarity. So trying to make clear about this multiplication that she makes a number of copies until she has a prime number of copies, and then turns it into a line to do more multiplications. So here's the revised version. And again, there was one section that I thought was a little bit confusing and a little bit off. So fix that. And that was the end of the discussion. So I'm about to show you this app that was created via conversation with ChatGPT. And the idea is to get across the idea of the story about the pebbles. So if we start with just the two primes, 2 and 3, and we multiply them together and add 1, we've got 7. And no matter what we do, we can't arrange them into a rectangle. So if the only possibility is 1 by 7 or 7 by 1, then we call that a prime. And so now we've got 7. We've added it because we just discovered. So now if we want to multiply these together and add 1, the app will now kind of illustrate how that works. So here we take the first prime, 2, and we're going to copy it 3 times. Now we're going to take and then the 6, we're going to multiply that 7, make it 7 copies, and then we add 1 more at the end. So we've got 43 pebbles now. And if we try to arrange it into 2 columns, if we look at the bottom, it doesn't match. It doesn't go exactly. If we rearrange it into 3, once again, we get 1 at the end. If we put it into 5 columns, we get 3 left over. Try again. 7 doesn't help. No matter what we do, you can't make a rectangle. So here we've got a new prime, 43. So now let's multiply these together and add 1. So we'll start again with 2, multiplying it by 3. Now we get the 6, and we're going to multiply that by 7. And then we've got the 42, and we're going to multiply 42 by 43, and then we're going to add 1. So obviously you wouldn't want to do this for bigger numbers unless there's change this app to be speed up at certain points. We could keep watching it down here. Hopefully it won't be too much longer. All of this could be polished further. Could have spent more time on it. But it did take almost a whole day back and forth with ChatGPT. Okay, so now we've got a new number, 1807. Put it into 2 columns. Then again, if we scroll to the very bottom, we see it doesn't go exactly. So rearrange with 3, no better, 5, 7, 11. But watch what happens now with 13. 13 actually does go in perfectly well. There's nothing left over at the bottom. So what does that mean? Well, 13 times 139 is 1807. So maybe 139 is a prime, or else we can break it down further. So if I proceed now, it's being a bit stupid. I think it's showing us how to get this 18. No, we got the 1807 before. Not quite sure. This might be a little bug. Doesn't matter. But what would happen if I was more patient is we would now consider 139 and see if that's could be put into a rectangle, and it'll be prime and it'll get added to this list. So you could always keep generating new ones is the point of this app. And if we click on information, all this text here was generated by ChatGPT, just saying, explain what this app does and what the point is. And then I think maybe at the end here, I added a couple sentences on my own. At first I had the app without the showing the rearrangements, and now we could actually see with 139 whether it's prime. So we just keep click, 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 and eventually we'll see that it's prime. There we go. So how was this made? If we go back to the information, um, we could click here and here's the conversation. So I started it off saying, we want to make a static web page that illustrates the proof. And the idea is basically to put pebbles into uh, rectangles if you can, and then how to go from one to the next by multiplying and adding one. And then it creates a, a web page with some JavaScript on it that does sort of very crudely what we saw a minute ago. And then I suggest um, arranging things in a better way, and then it does that. And then I wanted two buttons because at first I thought the user would want to either rearrange or go to the next next prime. So it does that. And then there's some issues like, why doesn't 7 get added to it, and it fixes that. And then so it's a lot of back and forth. Sometimes there's actually a bug, but most of the time it's just not doing quite what I wanted and have to give it a little bit more instructions or something. So if you're interested, you could look through the entire dialogue. But I should say that the half the job was to get the basic thing working, and the other half of the job was that last part where you actually animate the idea of multiplying 2 times 3 times 7 plus 1 or whatever. And 5, of course, is a prime, but the idea was 7 was discovered, so that's why I got added. That itself took several hours because ChatGPT was losing the context trying to add to a fairly big conversation, fairly big program. So presumably ChatGPT 4 with a larger context size, like 32K, probably would have had much less confusion there. So it was a bit difficult to get that last bit working. Okay, so then if we go back to the big picture here, let me make it full screen and all that. And we could really full screen. So what we've seen is these two things. And it's part of a bigger thing that I've been exploring, which is all different forms of this proof of Euclid that there's an infinite number of primes. So first, there's an example where I give it no context, no story, and then I say, that was good, but give me a completely different one. And then I said one where I repeat it, but I say, but this time make it a story that would be appealing to a young girl that likes horses. And there was another one that was to somebody who likes robots and so on. And then I tried all different kinds of forms, like an epic poem, a series of jokes, a play, a baking recipe. And these worked pretty well. Diary, love sonnet. I mean, none of them had, of course, this pebble metaphor that makes it kind of physically concrete. And I tried it with Google's Bard, and it did a bad job. I tried it with Anthropic's Claude 2, and it did an okay job. And I did it with a few others. I did it with Llama 2, and it did. I tried a lot of different models. And then this is a bit more about how I managed to illustrate the story you saw and a few other stories. And then I went on with other tasks like Cantor's theorem about the cardinality of rational and real numbers not being the same, and not just as a story. Then I tried it. Can you make a series of jokes? And it didn't do great. But then I tried Gödel's incompleteness theorem, and we kind of came up with a pretty good story, but didn't do that well with a series of jokes. And then the halting problem, and then with a bit of prompting and hints, it came up with some jokes that at least convey the core idea of Turing's proof. Then I tried Ramanujan's summation that 1 plus 2 plus 3 and so on equals minus 1/12. And that one, some progress, but not great. Didn't do too well with trying to come up with a story about why pi is irrational, but it did pretty good with why the square root of 2 is irrational, and it did okay with a series of jokes about that, and uh, did pretty good with a story about why 0.999 forever is equal to 1, and it did poorly with geometric proofs of Euclid's or Pythagoras' theorem and stuff. It just didn't get that idea very well. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. And at the very bottom here, maybe I'll make it a little smaller, is if you want to, all these resources are fully available from this document, and here's the QR code for it that I generated using this generative AI program. And it doesn't really look very much like a pencil drawing of pebbles on a beach, but it's kind of a cute QR code. So I hope you enjoyed this, and happy to receive comments or email about it. So thanks for watching. Bye.